an electric car that costs just $10,000. And surprisingly, this single car is giving even the biggest automobile companies sleepless nights. Yes, we're talking about a new Chinese electric vehicle that has created a huge buzz in the global market. Its impact has been so strong that established automotive giants are now openly expressing their concerns. But the real question is, what makes this car so special? Is it just the low price, or is there some technology behind it that could completely change the industry? For years, we've been told that building electric vehicles is expensive, batteries are costly, supply chains are complex, and research and development require massive investments. So how is China able to offer EVs at such low prices? Is the government heavily supporting these companies? Has there been a breakthrough in battery technology, or is this part of a long-term strategy to gradually dominate the global auto market? What makes this story even more interesting is that these cars are no longer limited to China. They are now entering markets where major global brands have traditionally dominated. So how exactly is China disrupting the automotive industry with low-cost electric vehicles, and how is it possible to make EVs this affordable? Stay with us until the end, because the real story isn't just about the price. The strategy behind it might surprise you. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more videos like this. Today, China is the world's largest electric vehicle market. In recent years, around 8 to 9 million electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles have been sold in China annually. This number alone exceeds the total car sales of many countries. To put this into perspective, around 14 to 15 million electric and plug-in hybrid vehicles are sold globally each year, and more than half of them are sold in China. This means a large portion of the global EV story revolves around China. One major reason prices have dropped so quickly, there is mass production. When cars are produced in millions, the cost per unit decreases significantly. This is known as the economy of scale. The share of electric vehicles in China is also rising rapidly. A few years ago, EVs made up only 5 to 6% of total new car sales, but today that number has crossed 30%, and in some months it even reaches 40%. In simple terms, 3 to 4 out of every 10 new cars sold in China are now electric or plug-in hybrids. Globally, EV adoption is also growing, though at different speeds across regions. Europe, the United States, and many emerging Asian markets are gradually increasing EV adoption, but China remains the fastest-growing market. Now let's return to the $10,000 electric car. One example is the BYD Seagull, whose base model is designed mainly for city driving. It typically offers a CLTC range of around 300 kilometers, although the real-world range can be slightly lower. The car comes with a small battery and basic safety features. The interior is simple, but not completely minimal. It can include a touchscreen display, a digital instrument cluster, and some smart connectivity options. However, when compared with more expensive electric vehicles, the differences become clear. Premium materials, long-distance highway range, advanced driver assistance systems, and high-end sound systems are usually not included in the base model. It's also important to remember that this price applies only within China. When the same car is exported to other countries, additional costs such as import duties, shipping charges, local safety requirements, and dealer margins are added. As a result, the car cannot be sold for $10,000 in overseas markets. In terms of quality, a low price does not necessarily mean the car is poor, but it does mean certain compromises are made. The build quality is decent, but it may not feel very premium. Most of these vehicles use LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate. These batteries are cheaper and safer, although their energy density is slightly lower than NMC batteries. Because of this, range can drop more noticeably during long highway drives. These cars are generally designed for short daily commutes and city driving rather than long-distance travel. Of course, the suitability of the vehicle depends on each user's needs. So how is China able to produce such affordable EVs? The simple answer is that China doesn't see electric vehicles as just cars. It sees them as an entire ecosystem. In many countries, car manufacturers build the vehicle itself while sourcing batteries, chips, motors, and raw materials from different suppliers. But China took a different approach from the beginning. It recognized early that if the future of transportation is electric, then controlling the entire supply chain would be crucial, and this is where the real story and the real strategy begins. First, let's talk about manufacturing scale. In China, electric vehicles are not being produced in thousands. They are being produced in the millions. When a product is manufactured at such a massive scale, the cost per unit naturally decreases. Factories produce millions of vehicles of the same model. Machines run continuously, suppliers keep delivering components, and the production lines rarely stop. The advantage of this system is clear. The cost of each car gradually drops over time. In many Western countries, companies are still producing EVs in relatively limited numbers, which keeps their costs high. China, on the other hand, has already expanded both demand and production, helping to significantly lower prices. Now let's move to another key factor: supply chain control. Building an electric vehicle requires many components: battery cells, electric motors, power electronics, chips, wiring, and software. If even one of these parts has to be imported and becomes delayed or expensive, it increases the cost of the entire car. China has reduced this risk by producing most of these components domestically. Battery cell factories are located close to vehicle plants. Motor manufacturers operate nearby. Suppliers of electronic control units are also within the country. This setup reduces transportation costs, shortens delivery times, and keeps overall prices under control. That's one reason why many Chinese companies recovered quickly, even during the global supply chain disruptions. Another major factor is self-reliance in battery production. Batteries alone account for roughly 30 to 40% of the total cost of an electric vehicle. If batteries remain expensive, it becomes almost impossible to produce affordable EVs. Chinese companies began investing heavily in battery technology years ago. One of the key technologies they adopted widely is LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate. These batteries have slightly lower energy density than NMC batteries, but they are cheaper, safer, and more durable. When millions of batteries are produced using the same technology, manufacturing costs drop even further. In addition, many of the world's largest battery manufacturers are based in China. Because of this, much of the profit stays within the country, which also helps keep prices lower. Now let's look at perhaps the most important factor: the entire ecosystem, from raw materials to the finished car. China plays a major role in the processing of key raw materials used in EV batteries, such as lithium, nickel, and cobalt. While the mines themselves may be located in different countries, a large portion of the refining and processing happens in China. This means the raw materials are imported, refined, turned into battery cells, assembled into battery packs, and then installed into vehicles, often within the same national ecosystem. Very few countries have this level of vertical integration. In many other regions, each step of the process happens in a different country, which increases both cost and complexity. China approached EV manufacturing differently. Instead of treating it as separate steps, it viewed the entire process as a single interconnected chain. If even one link in that chain is weak, costs increase. So China focused on strengthening every link. In the early stages, the government supported the industry with subsidies, infrastructure development, expanded charging networks, and policy support, helping companies reach large production scales. Today, even though some subsidies are gradually being reduced, the ecosystem has become so strong that many companies can still survive while selling cars at relatively low prices. It's also important to understand that affordable EVs don't necessarily mean top-tier luxury. To keep costs low, companies often limit certain features, keep the interior simple, and design the vehicles mainly for city driving rather than long highway trips. These choices help reduce production costs even further. And because the entire supply chain is largely domestic, companies can operate with smaller profit margins but much higher sales volumes. This idea can be summarized in a simple line. When you control the entire supply chain, you control the price. If raw materials, batteries, motors, assembly, and sales all exist within the same ecosystem, companies gain the power to decide how competitively they can price their cars. That's why Chinese EVs can reach such low price points. It's not just about cheaper labor. It's the result of a carefully planned industrial strategy. But to truly understand how China makes EVs so affordable, we need to look deeper, not at the car itself, but at the battery. In an electric vehicle, the battery is essentially the heart of the entire system. Unlike traditional cars, where the engine is the most critical component, in EVs, the battery plays that role. As mentioned earlier, 30 to 40% of an electric car's total cost comes from the battery alone. If manufacturers can make batteries cheaper and reliable, the overall cost of the vehicle drops dramatically. And this is exactly where LFP battery technology becomes the real game changer. LFP stands for lithium iron phosphate. The name may sound technical, but the concept behind it is quite simple. This type of battery chemistry uses little or none of the expensive metals like cobalt and nickel. Because of this, it is significantly cheaper than NMC batteries, nickel manganese cobalt. In the past, many manufacturers believed that NMC batteries were better because they have higher energy density. This means a smaller battery can store more energy and provide a longer driving range. However, these batteries are also more expensive. China took a different approach. The idea was simple. If electric vehicles are meant for millions of people, the batteries need to be affordable, safe, and reliable, even if that means slightly less range. One of the biggest advantages of LFP batteries is their safety. They are more stable and much less likely to catch fire or explode, even if they overheat. This makes them especially suitable for daily urban driving. For most people who drive about 30 to 50 kilometers a day, an extremely long range of 500 kilometers isn't really necessary. What matters more is reliability, affordability, and durability. Another strong point of LFP batteries is their long lifespan. They can handle a larger number of charge cycles, which means they can last for many years without significant performance loss. Over time, this also helps reduce the overall cost of owning the vehicle. Now let's talk about energy density versus cost. Energy density refers to how much energy a battery can store relative to its weight or size. NMC batteries have higher energy density, which is why they are commonly used in high-end electric cars with long driving ranges. But this higher performance comes with a higher price. LFP batteries, on the other hand, have slightly lower energy density. This means the battery may need to be a little larger or heavier to provide the same range. However, because the chemistry is cheaper, the overall price of the vehicle becomes much lower. China chose this balance carefully, a small compromise on range in exchange for major advantages in cost and safety. Another important factor behind the success of LFP batteries is large-scale production. When a technology is produced in the millions, the cost naturally drops. Chinese battery manufacturers have widely adopted LFP technology and continuously improved it over time. Today's LFP batteries offer better energy density and improved performance compared to earlier versions. Many of the initial limitations are gradually being solved. Because of these improvements, even many Western automakers are now adopting LFP batteries, especially in entry-level and standard-range electric vehicles. Now let's look at the global influence of Chinese battery companies. Today, many of the world's largest EV manufacturers rely on Chinese companies for their battery supply. China is not only producing batteries for its own vehicles, but also supplying them to the rest of the world. In many countries, the battery technology used in electric cars has some connection to Chinese manufacturers or supply chains. This gives China a strong influence over battery pricing, supply availability, and technological development. When a country controls one of the largest production networks in the world, it also gains the ability to influence market prices. However, it's important to maintain perspective. LFP batteries are not perfect for every situation. For long-distance highway driving or high-performance electric cars, NMC or other high-energy battery chemistries may still be a better choice. That's why premium and performance-focused EVs often continue to use different battery technologies. But for the mass market, where most people simply want a reliable and affordable vehicle, LFP batteries have become a true game changer. Now let's look at the impact on the global market. If we assume that China's affordable electric vehicles will remain limited to China, that would be an incomplete picture. The real story begins when these cars move beyond China's borders and enter global markets. Over the past few years, Chinese EV companies have rapidly expanded into Latin America, Europe, and several Asian countries. Markets that were once dominated by Japanese, European, and American car brands are now seeing the growing presence of Chinese manufacturers, offering vehicles with competitive prices and decent features. Price plays a particularly important role in regions like Latin America. In many countries there, people are looking for vehicles that are affordable, easy to maintain, and reliable for daily use. Chinese electric vehicles fit these requirements well. The combination of low purchase price, lower running costs, since electricity is cheaper than petrol, and practical features makes them appealing to many buyers. Gradually, electric taxis and delivery vehicles are also starting to appear on the roads, sending a clear message. Electric vehicles are no longer only for the wealthy. The situation in Europe is somewhat different. Regulations there are much stricter. Safety standards, emissions rules, and quality requirements are closely monitored. Despite this, several Chinese EV brands have successfully entered European markets. The reason is fairly simple. Fuel prices in Europe are high, and governments are strongly encouraging the transition to electric vehicles. Because of this, if a company offers an electric car at a lower price, customers will naturally consider it. Even though EV prices in Europe are not as low as they are in China, mainly due to tariffs, import duties, and strict regulations, competition is still increasing. This growing competition is forcing many local manufacturers to rethink their pricing strategies and long-term plans. The situation in Asia is even more interesting. In many emerging economies, such as Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, and large markets like India, the demand for electric vehicles is slowly rising. In these countries, price remains one of the most important factors. If an electric vehicle costs significantly more than a petrol car, many people hesitate to switch. However, as more affordable EV options start appearing in the market, consumer confidence is gradually increasing. This is especially true in major cities where traffic congestion is high and fuel costs continue to rise. In these conditions, electric vehicles are beginning to look like a more practical and economical choice. Now let's talk about demand in emerging markets. The middle class is expanding quickly in many of these countries. More families are buying their first or second car. They are looking for vehicles that feel modern, include digital features, and are affordable to operate in the long run. If the starting price of an electric vehicle becomes close to that of a petrol car, many buyers may seriously consider going electric. This is where China's affordable EVs could play a major role. Their presence is already starting to impact the traditional petrol car market. For many years, petrol vehicles were the default choice for most buyers, but now consumers have another option, and that option is gradually becoming cheaper. If electric vehicle prices continue to fall and charging infrastructure keeps improving, the advantages of petrol cars will slowly begin to decline. Automakers around the world are realizing this shift. Many companies understand that if they fail to introduce affordable EV models quickly, they risk losing a significant share of the market. As a result, several traditional car manufacturers are now working on entry-level electric vehicles aimed at the mass market. When it comes to smaller cities, the transition is happening more slowly, but it is definitely possible. In the past, EVs were mostly associated with large metropolitan areas where charging stations and awareness were more common. But now, charging infrastructure is gradually expanding into smaller cities and towns as well. For families whose daily commute is around 20 to 30 kilometers, an electric vehicle can be an ideal solution. Electricity is cheaper than fuel, maintenance costs are lower, and there is no need to worry about things like engine oil changes. As more people gain real-world experience with EVs, adoption is likely to increase. However, it's important to remember that every country has its own policies, tariffs, and manufacturing regulations. Because of this, Chinese electric vehicles cannot be sold at the exact same price in every market. In some countries, companies may need to set up local manufacturing, while in others, high import duties may increase the final price. Even so, one thing is clear: global competition in the auto industry has intensified. Now let's talk about another major factor: the role of government support and subsidies. Whenever people discuss China's affordable EVs, one common question comes up. Is this success mainly because of government subsidies? In the early stages, the answer was largely yes. China recognized the potential of the electric vehicle industry quite early and provided significant support to both manufacturers and consumers. For buyers, this meant that when someone purchased an electric car, the government often covered a portion of the price through subsidies. This had two major effects. First, customers were able to buy EVs at a much lower cost. Second, companies gained the opportunity to scale up production and build their businesses. Beyond direct subsidies, the government also introduced tax incentives. In many cities, registration fees for electric vehicles were either reduced or completely eliminated. At the same time, petrol cars often faced long waiting periods or lottery systems for license plates, while electric vehicles could be registered almost immediately. This sent a very clear message: buying an electric car was strongly encouraged. As a result, EV adoption increased rapidly. Local companies also received strong support in other ways. Governments provided research and development funding, affordable land for factories, easy access to loans, and dedicated manufacturing zones for EV production. All of this allowed companies to expand quickly. In other words, the government didn't just provide financial help, it also created an environment where EV companies could grow and operate with fewer obstacles. That's why dozens of new electric vehicle startups appeared in China within just a few years. Another critical piece of the puzzle was charging infrastructure. After all, if charging stations are not available, people are unlikely to buy electric vehicles. China addressed this issue by installing thousands of charging stations across major cities and highways. Local governments were also given targets to expand charging networks in their regions. This increased people's confidence because they felt they would not be left stranded without charging options. But now an important question arises. If government subsidies are being reduced or removed in many places, How are EV prices still staying low? The answer lies in scale and the overall ecosystem. The early subsidies helped companies grow rapidly and reach massive production levels. Because of this scale, manufacturers are now able to produce vehicles at much lower costs, even without heavy government support. Battery production is largely domestic, the supply chain is strong, and millions of vehicles are being manufactured every year. In simple terms, the government gave the industry an initial push, but now the system has become strong enough to operate largely on its own. Another question often raised is whether this strategy is a form of dumping, selling products at extremely low prices to capture the market and then raising prices later. Some people do see it that way, but describing it only as dumping may not fully explain the situation. It can also be viewed as a long-term market strategy. A good example is the smartphone industry. Many Chinese smartphone brands initially sold their devices at very low prices. At that time, critics claimed they were simply trying to capture market share through cheap pricing. However, over time, those same companies invested heavily in technology, improved their products, built strong brand recognition, and eventually became major global players. A similar pattern could emerge in the electric vehicle market. In the beginning, the focus is often on entering the market and increasing sales volume. As more vehicles are sold, factories operate at full capacity, production costs drop, and technology improves. During this early phase, profits may be low and margins may remain thin. But in the long run, gaining a large market share can be more valuable. If a company establishes its presence in multiple global markets, it opens the door to future revenue streams through services, software updates, upgrades, and new technologies. So, is China's strategy to focus on volume first and profits later? To a large extent, that does appear to be the case. The approach seems to focus on making EVs accessible to a large number of people, encouraging widespread adoption and building a strong industrial ecosystem. Once that ecosystem becomes stable and mature, profits can naturally become more consistent. For this reason, it would be too simplistic to say that affordable Chinese EVs exist only because of subsidies. In reality, the situation looks more like part of a long-term industrial strategy. When people say that cheap Chinese EVs are causing concern in the offices of major companies like Ford Motor Company and General Motors, it's important to look at the situation realistically. These companies are not necessarily panicking, but they are definitely paying close attention. Their main concern is not just the selling price of Chinese EVs, but rather the difference in cost structures. Manufacturing cars in the United States is expensive. There are unionized workers whose salaries, health benefits, and pensions are protected through labor agreements. While this system supports workers and provides stability, it also increases production costs. In China, labor and manufacturing costs are often lower, which allows companies to keep vehicle prices more competitive. Another factor is the overall cost of manufacturing in the United States. Companies must deal with expenses related to land, electricity, environmental regulations, and strict safety standards. In addition, the supply chain is not entirely domestic, and many components still come from different countries. When costs are high at every stage of production, the final price of the car also becomes higher. That is why it is not easy for companies like Ford or General Motors to produce an electric vehicle that costs around $10,000. In fact, executives from these companies have openly acknowledged that China's EV technology and cost structure are highly competitive and should not be underestimated. At the same time, they have made it clear that they are preparing for this competition. Their strategy includes reducing battery costs, strengthening local supply chains, and introducing more affordable entry-level electric vehicles. So it would be fair to say that they are not afraid, but they are definitely cautious. Now comes another important question. Will this $10,000 electric car ever be available at the same price in countries like the United States or India? The simple answer is no, at least not for now. As soon as a car is exported from one country to another, import tariffs and duties are applied. In the United States, vehicles imported from China can face significant tariffs. India also imposes high import duties on foreign cars. Because of this, a car that costs $10,000 in China can become much more expensive once it reaches another country. There are also differences in safety and regulatory standards. Countries such as the United States and India have their own rules regarding crash tests, airbags, emissions, and electronic safety systems. Manufacturers often have to modify vehicles to meet these regulations, which further increases costs. When you add shipping expenses, dealer margins, and compliance with local laws, the final price rises even more. If you enjoy research-based and fact-driven videos like this, consider subscribing to the channel so you can stay updated on the latest developments in the electric vehicle market, technology trends, and the global auto industry.